Welcome to How Do They Afford That, the podcast that peeks into the financial lives of everyday Australians. I'm Michael Thompson. I'm a writer and co-host of the podcast Fear and Greed Business News. And as always, I'm with Canna Campbell, financial planner, founder of Sugar Mama TV, the financial literacy platform that is on YouTube and obviously your own website and podcasts and books and Instagram and more. Good morning, Canna.
Good morning, Michael. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Look, we're starting on a very civilised note today. We've had a few really interesting episodes lately. Last week's episode, if you have not heard it, you must go back and listen to Peter Thornhill and the advice that he gives and just his investing journey and how he managed to build a $10 million investment portfolio.
Starting at age 51.
Indeed. So it wasn't as though he started when he was kind of 10 years old and has just been kind of doing this for decades and decades and decades. He started this when he was in his 50s and it's now worth $10 million and he goes through his strategy in detail.
And he has 3 holidays a year. So he's got a fantastic lifestyle.
It's amazing.
I'm still buzzing.
Oh, that was a great conversation last week. So definitely go back and have a listen to that one. Have you got a savings hack for us today, Canna?
Well, I do, but it's not my own. Another listener has very kindly shared their saving hack with us so that we can share it with everyone else.
This is fantastic because now we're just getting this regular, is it a flood? Has it passed the threshold of being a flood now of kind of tips and hacks coming through the door?
I think so.
Okay. A veritable flood of tips. So if you do have one, please keep them coming.
We love them. So this is from Faye.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, "Hi, Canna, I just heard your mobile phone podcast and I wanted to add another savings hack into that list. Sometimes JB Hi-Fi has a deal with Telstra. So if you switch to Telstra on a plan for 1 year at $69 a month, which is normally $115 per month, they'll give you $300 to $500 in credit. I use that to offset my iPhone 13. After a year when iPhone 14 came out, I sold my 13 and bought 14 and switched to Optus. This was doing a deal at $24.50 per month, normally $49 per month for switching providers."
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Do any of these listeners, whenever they contact you talking about our podcast, do they say, "Hi, Canna and Michael," or is it always just, "Hi, Canna"?
You know what? They actually do.
Oh, really?
Yeah. In fact,
it's not a fragile kind of ego or anything, but I just like to know.
Someone messaged me actually the other day to say, and I actually screenshot it to actually send it to you, but I forgot because my brain doesn't sometimes work. And they said to let me know. They messaged me to say, "Don't worry, I sleep in my dressing gown too. It's great. It's so comfortable." So, to tell Michael that, do not judge us for sleeping in our dressing gowns because it's a very comfortable, safe place to speak. I'm actually trying to find the DMs to prove you. And I replied back saying, "Thank you for making me feel safe."
It just sounded odd when this was in a podcast weeks ago now, and it just sounded odd that you sleep in your dressing gown because I just worry about the rope around the middle and the fact that it would create like a knot.
I believe you said knob was the term you used.
Did I?
You know what? The other week you made Adam Lang very aware that I called him Big Daddy. So now is my time to remind you use the word knob on our podcast.
Let's move on. Let's move on very, very quickly. And we're actually doing a very serious topic today. And I'll be interested in your thoughts on this because this is something that we had a couple of requests for this to be discussed. A long time ago, in one of our first episodes, it was in our first month, I think it was, we talked about what to do if your partner is a saver and you're a spender, or kind of vice versa. And it was a real eye-opener, I think, about the importance of communication in a relationship. But, and this is what we've had requests to discuss, is what to do when a relationship ends and all of your shared finances are no longer shared. And so how you go about kind of unraveling things, because obviously it's a fairly traumatic time anyway, because a relationship is kind of coming to an end, but there's this added complication of the money side of it. So I really want to kind of get your thoughts on how all of this works. Before we do that, though, we need to make it very clear that anything we're talking about today is general in nature. It is always general in nature. It's never personal, investment, strategic, or product advice. It is purely for financial education purposes only.
That's right. We don't know anything about your situation, so please always bear that in mind, that this is for your educational purposes only.
Where do we start with this? I'm going out on a bit of a limb here and saying I would imagine that communication is absolutely key when a relationship ends and you are just starting the process of going, okay, what do we do about the money?
Yes, communication, but also taking a calm, rational approach to this situation, because obviously a relationship breakdown can be one that is very draining, very emotional, can be quite triggering as well. So making sure that you've got your emotions in check and both parties do as best they can, but also having a vision for what you want going forward. And then having some legal advice as well as some financial advice.
Okay. And I suppose it would be, if possible, it would be good to get that advice together on how to separate finances. But if not possible, then you need to be getting your own advice.
Look, it is extremely important that you get independent legal advice. Okay. And most lawyers will say that to you. You must go, you can't, whilst together, if it's an amicable split, you might be able to speak to a lawyer together and say, we're separating, what is the best way of doing this? And they can give their advice. But ultimately, to make sure that your interests have been looked at and upheld correctly and that there's no bias, most lawyers will say you need to get independent advice and get a lawyer to sign off that you understand exactly what you're doing and you are happy with what you're agreeing to. Okay,
can we start with joint bank accounts? Is it just a case of then opening two accounts and splitting the contents? Or I suppose actually maybe we should backtrack and go, are joint bank accounts a good idea in the first place?
Joint bank accounts are perfectly fine. I mean, especially if you have children and you've got, even if you have maybe pets, or you're renting together, or even, you don't even rent together, but you're saving up for something together in particular, like a holiday together, sometimes having a joint bank account is extremely helpful. It's a practical part of life. So there definitely shouldn't be any embarrassment or shame for having a joint bank account with someone. But at the end of the day, it's very personal and there's no wrong or right. But if you have a joint bank account and things have gone pear-shaped and they've gone pear-shaped quite quickly, there are a couple of different things that you can do to protect that money, because obviously if you both have access to that money, you could both potentially spend it. So assuming that you have set up that joint account as joint signatories, that is one way to stop it from someone spending the money without the other knowing. So it means you've both got to sign off on any transactions within the account.
Okay. Is that over a particular level normally? Or I suppose you could set that you could do any transactions over a certain amount needs both signatures, that kind of thing.
Well, you can also contact the bank and ask them to actually freeze the account so that neither of you can actually spend the money as well. That's another option.
Okay.
Or the other option is again, you need to get advice, because if you do anything that's seen as being, I guess, destructive or aggressive, that can come back to bite you, particularly if it ends up in court.
Okay.
But potentially after you've sought advice and also you've communicated this, you might be able to withdraw potentially half of that money, assuming that half of it is actually legally yours, so that you don't need to worry about your share being spent.
Okay. This next question, I don't really know how to ask this actually without I know this is a very delicate area, but should you keep your own money aside in a relationship? And it's not even just so much a just in case, but is there an element of maintaining your own financial independence when you are in a relationship?
Look, you need to be smart and you need to be real.
Yeah.
Relationships do end unexpectedly and for various different reasons. However, I don't believe you should be hiding money ever, but I do believe it's very healthy to have your own sense of independence as well as a joint family or a unit sort of, I guess, financial goals or financial goal account as well. So, and I'll use myself as an example because I'm happy to, and also Tom's very happy to as well. But, Tom and I, before we became a family, we each had our own, assets and responsibilities, and we've both maintained those ourselves. But then we drew a line in the sand and went, okay, well, going forward from now, money that we have is our money together as a family unit.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm aware that Tom has various things that he's acquired and accumulated, before we officially became a family, and vice versa for Tom. And those assets are off topics if our relationship was to ever fall apart.
Mm-hmm.
But we do have a joint account and joint investments together as a family unit. But I do think, particularly for women, it is very important to be able to know where your money is and have some sense of independence as well. That doesn't mean, though, hiding money ever from your partner. And you should always think about, well, is that saying, treat people as the way that you would like to be treated. And I know there was a very popular, I guess, theory or idea called a FU fund, where it was encouraged that women had secret savings accounts so that if they decided one day, for whatever reason, to leave this relationship, they could tap into those secret savings that they've been squirreling away and sail off into the sunset.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's necessarily the most honourable way of doing things, particularly if you've both been working really hard and one person's potentially been working hard and the other person's been maybe not pulling their weight as much because they've been ciphering money off on the side. However, there is most definitely an exception to this, and that is any situation that involves family violence, domestic violence, emotional abuse. Those situations, that's totally different. And yes, you may need to, for a very simple reason of your basic safety, need to be piling money elsewhere in order to be able to keep yourself safe and children safe as well.
We might do a separate episode on that at
Yes.
some point, because that is such a big and serious and vital issue to talk about, kind of money in domestic violence, family violence, financial abuse and coercive control, and those topics. It is becoming, unfortunately, a bigger and bigger issue, and I think it's probably worth doing a standalone episode.
Absolutely. I think
On
that's
that.
essential.
Look, let's talk about property. Say you bought a house with someone. How do you change that? Where would you even start?
Oh, there's lots of things to be considered, and it can get very complicated and it can get very messy. So you really do need to be picking up the phone and getting in front of a lawyer and getting some advice from them. But obviously keeping in mind, I'm a financial planner, not a lawyer, so I'm going to, rightfully stay in my lane. But there are things you need to consider, like how much equity do you have within the home? How much do you own of the home? Maybe you only own a third of it, or perhaps you own most of it. How long have you been living in the house together? Who paid for it? How much did you spend on stamp duty? How much equity have you got? What's the size of the home loan? How long has the home loan been going? What are the terms and conditions of the home? And perhaps it's fixed. There are so many things to consider. And you also may have already had some sort of agreement in place, like a cohabitation agreement. But was there an expiry with that cohabitation agreement? Maybe we've been together 15 years and that was a cohabitation agreement that only lasted a couple of years. There's, lots of details that you really need to look at and consider before you start making any major decisions.
I'm sorry for my ignorance here. What is a cohabitation agreement?
It's kind of like a prenup.
Like a prenup, but just for living together?
Yeah. So
Okay.
particularly if maybe one person owns a property and the other person moves in, that person will agree, there are certain terms and conditions if the relationship doesn't work, how that might end and whether someone is actually entitled to something or not. And there are various opinions of whether how much weight they hold up in court, but some people like just to have them in place just for their own comfort or just in case.
At the very least, it's a conversation that you should have, isn't it?
Absolutely. And, you just talk about property, but when it comes to separation, it's not just the physical property. There are so many other things included, things like cars, jewelry become part of the actual property when it comes to settlement, superannuation, businesses, children, pets, those sorts of things. So there's a lot involved. So you really need to get advice and follow that advice.
Yeah.
Because that's what's going to keep you cool, calm, and collected if it does involve going to court and standing in front of a judge and a judge ultimately making a decision, for you.
And just from the property side, I suppose I would imagine it's probably easier with renting that it would just be a change to the lease agreement compared to trying
yes.
to do a separation of an asset like a house that you are living in.
Well, one thing I should say with the house thing, if, the property is going to be transferred to one partner from the other, there are the benefits of potentially stamp duty being waived. So sometimes, and this is why I say you've got to speak to a financial planner and a lawyer as well, because, the lawyer might say, well, just sell a house and split the money. But then, in fact, it may be better for the person to actually buy out that house because it means they're not going to have to go and spend stamp duty all over again because they can have that potentially waived. However, with renting, it's not just a matter of changing the lease. There's all sorts of other things. And this is where things can get very messy if it's a bitter separation. But electricity bills, they'd be in joint names. The gas bill could also be in joint names. Insurance, home contents insurance, this is Foxtel, internet.
Yeah.
And then you've got your bond. That would have been in joint names. So
there's a lot.
There's a lot to consider. And then what happens if you need to break your lease? Some landlords can charge a pretty penny to break a lease early, particularly if you're going to break that lease at a time where it's hard to rent property out, like long weekends, Easter, Christmas time, where a lot of people are away. They're not really looking at moving homes. And then you need to think about, well, can we sublet? Can we change people's on the name on the lease? You want to make sure you do this properly because if you have, for example, say you and I are in a relationship and we split up and I didn't go and pay the electricity bill, you could end up with a bit of problems with your credit score.
I want to come to that in a little bit because that is, I imagine, a significant risk of someone's credit score being damaged, but also being left with a lot of debt that you didn't accrue on your own. So we'll come to that one in a moment. I also want to talk to you about other investments. We might take a very quick break and then come back and look at what happens with some of those other investments, like, say, a share portfolio, and how you might even start to separate that in the event of a separation. We'll be back in a sec. All right, Canna, we're talking about what to do with money when a relationship ends. And it is a very serious topic, this one. And it is one that doesn't have any simple answers. I think I've already kind of figured that out from the first half of this, that really communication is absolutely vital, and getting good independent advice, both from kind of a lawyer and a financial advisor who is able to kind of go through your circumstances with you. What about other investments? Things like, say, a share portfolio. How hard is that to separate?
Well, because you don't have stamp duty and we have the share market, so you can literally sell a share portfolio and 2 business days later have the money, it's quite easy to liquidate. However, there are still things you need to think about with that. So you're obviously going to be triggering capital gains tax, and then there's going to be brokerage. You've got time out of the market. There are lots of things that need to be considered with that. And I have been a financial planner. I ran my own practice for 17 years, and I have gone through a few divorces with clients. And it's funny, they'll fight over the funny things like the painting or, the cutlery, the funny things. No one really cares about the share portfolio. It kind of gets cast to the side. But in fact, that might be the one asset that actually helps someone continue on rebuilding their life and creating a sense of financial independence well into the future. People get kind of bogged down with the emotions and the turmoil of it all, and making irrational, emotionally driven decisions, and sort of lose sight of what you're trying to do with your life. So, but yes, the share portfolio can be broken down. There are consequences, but sometimes there may be a situation where you come to some sort of term agreement where this person gets to keep that asset and that person gets to keep that asset. So you don't necessarily need to actually sell anything as such.
You mentioned almost in passing earlier, superannuation and insurance was one that you mentioned, but the beneficiaries of say super, but also insurance policies. What do people need to know here?
Oh, there's a lot to take on with superannuation.
I've probably asked you
we could probably do a whole episode on super, but that's okay. Look, super is actually still part of the property settlement, so it definitely needs to be divided between the partners, whether it's a marriage or de facto, and in New South Wales, whether it's a heterosexual or same-sex relationship. Interestingly, though, in WA, they don't recognise de facto, but with superannuation, you might be thinking, okay, well, I don't have much in super. My partner has a lot in super. I'm going to be getting half of that. That might be the case, but that's not coming in as cold, hard cash. That's going to stay within superannuation. So if you are going to be receiving some of that superannuation money, it's not coming in for you to then go and spend and think, oh, I can use that as a deposit, or go on a great holiday. It has to stay within the superannuation environment. And there are situations where people will actually agree to defer the decision around their superannuation at a later date, particularly if someone's got, defined benefit scheme, or it's a self-managed super fund with certain assets that can't necessarily be liquidated, or it's not in anyone's interest or benefit to liquidate immediately because they won't be getting the value of what it's truly worth.
Right.
So you can defer it, and but the paperwork has to be lodged with the courts, and there are certain conditions and deadlines. Same as the share portfolio, people agree, well, look, you know what, I don't want any of your superannuation, but I would like a portion of this instead. And that's why I said at the beginning of this episode, having, a clear headspace, but having a vision about the future. We can go back to the he said, she said, he did that, I did that, found out this. You've got to, and I say this as someone who's gone through a divorce and has a lot of experience around this, you've got to think about going forward, what do I want? Whenever you catch yourself going, this hurts, I'm angry, or I want revenge, come back to, where do you want to be in a year's time? You want to be happy. You want to be focusing on what you can do and what you can build and what you can achieve for yourself, and moving on with your life and doing the things that you want to do with your life. So it is important that you understand what you're entitled to, but you actually plan ahead and grow from this. Okay.
You mentioned in the superannuation, I might have missed it, but changing the name on who's the beneficiary.
Beneficiaries. Right. So yes, and in relation to insurance and superannuation. So thank you for reminding me. If you are no longer committed to this person and you're not tied to that person, for example, you don't have any young children or children with them, and there's no need for them to be the beneficiary, you don't want them to be the beneficiary, you need to make sure that you update your superannuation statements to reflect who is the beneficiary of your superannuation money should something happen to you, but also the insurance policies as well that you may have. So, for example, you might have a life policy or a TPD policy, and there would be a nominated beneficiary, and you need to check those and see whether they are, binding, which means that you can't sort of fight them.
Okay.
So many times when I've had a new client and we've gone through their superannuation statements and we've looked at who the current beneficiary is, they're like, oh, that's my ex-wife from like 15 years ago. Well,
and so that's a call to your insurer or to your super fund. Yeah. It is just picking up the phone and asking the question.
Yes, and then you literally complete a new form.
Okay. All right. That's fairly straightforward, as much as any of this can be straightforward, which is really not much at all. The risk with all of this, what you mentioned credit scores before. Where does the risk come from? Is it that you might inherit somebody's debt? Is it that there isn't a clean separation of finances, and they might there might still be a credit card in both names and that kind of thing? That you might have kind of debt being kind of built up somewhere that you don't know about. Where's the risk here?
Well, the risk is if you don't do your admin properly and as quickly as possible, that if they either intentionally or accidentally don't pay a bill or don't pay a bill on time, it could impact your credit score because your name is still, for example, on that energy bill or that gas bill. So the moment that it is appropriate, you need to remove your name and close off any accounts from any joint responsibilities that you may have and open a new one up in your own name so that you are solely responsible and you cannot be tied to anything that your ex-partner may do with their money or what they may sign themselves up to, so that you are completely safe and protected to the best of your ability. And, that's why, closing off accounts when you can and when, it's the appropriate time is really important. And, it's all checking you've done it for every single possible bill that you can think of.
I've heard some horror stories about, and this can actually almost be one of those factors that contributes to the end of a relationship, about finding out, say, for instance, about, say, a gambling habit that you didn't know about that your partner has, and that suddenly there is a whole lot of debt built up in your name as well as theirs, and that then the separation occurs, but you are still stuck with a fairly significant chunk of debt.
Yep.
That feels like it would be an absolute nightmare to sort through.
The scary thing is that particular spouse that's discovering all of this can't actually borrow any money because their credit score has been destroyed. So not only have they had their money lost, particularly through addiction, and gambling's a really frightening one because it's not physically evident. With alcohol and drugs, you can see it in someone's behavior, you can smell it and witness it, but with gambling, it's not until it's at crisis point that we actually discover what's really going on when the house is being repossessed. And that is when that person's credit score is too badly damaged. So even if they end the relationship and get out of it, they then carry the financial damage and destruction for the next 7 years or however long it can take to get help in rebuilding your credit and clearing that bad debt.
Oh, well, look, we're kind of finished at the place where we started, which is about the need for very, very clear communication when going through separation and talking about the money side of things, but also making sure that you have got really good advice, really good legal advice, really good financial advice the whole way through, because that is what's going to be able to help you set up with that end goal in mind, kind of knowing where you want to be, so that your kind of mindset is set as you go through it. And we talked about kind of your joint bank accounts and property, and whether you own a property or whether you're on a lease agreement with somebody, but there's a whole lot of different parts of that, whether it's even kind of separating out the gas bill and the power bill and the water bill and all of these kind of other bits and pieces that might all have both of your names on it, but that you need to be going through and making sure you tick all of those boxes and working through all of the admin associated with it and getting that advice along the way. Again, for your investments, any investments that you have in your name, and superannuation and insurance are big ones. Clearly they are things, because we all generally all have superannuation. Most of us all have kind of insurance policies. And so you just need to be making sure that you are covering off those bases as well, and being mindful of the impact of your credit score, and getting that advice as you go to ensure that you are protecting your position and protecting your kind of credit score and protecting the future that you want to still have after this relationship. Is that kind of... There's so much in this.
There's so much, but yeah.
And it's a very, very serious one. And I think we will do a separate episode on domestic violence and financial abuse, because that is a whole nother topic altogether. All right. Anyone who wants more information, best to reach you on Instagram?
Correct.
Excellent. So that is Sugar Mama TV on Instagram. And you can hear me every day with Sean Aylmer on Fear and Greed Business News, Australia's best business podcast. Thank you very much for listening to How Do They Afford That? Remember to hit follow on the podcast. Please leave us a review as well. Next week, it's actually going to get a little bit personal next week, Canna. We're doing a bit of
We're going to have a heart-to-heart, you and I.
About a few of my own money blocks, because you've discovered a few of them.
I have, and we're going to do something about it.
Okay, I'm looking forward to it. I should be a little bit wary, but I'm actually looking forward to it.
I'm promised to be kind.
Let's see how it goes. We'll jump into it next week. Do not miss it.